great problem there, of course, is that the fear of God is a term that occurs over and over again in the Old and New Testament. And it's not emphasized enough that the fear of God is a technical term. It does not mean the emotion of fear. It has nothing to do with the emotions. It means, in the Old Testament, someone who has the right relationship with God. Now, the right relationship with God is to trust Him. In a psychological age such as ours, the child, and all of us perhaps, translate the fear of God every time we hear it in the lessons in the liturgy as the emotion of fear, which means to be afraid of fear. Now, the natural biological result of fear is to put adrenaline into the body and prepare you to run away. So there's only two human responses to the emotion of fear, which is to fight or take flight. Well, most people are not going to get into a punching match with God. What's left? Get as far away from Him as possible. Now they're called to the spiritual journey. They have the mindset of early childhood thoroughly indoctrinated in their emotional system, that you've got to be afraid of God. They have this attraction from the gospel and the inner movement of the Spirit to trust and love God. Imagine what they're in. Until they all get rid of that fear, the spiritual journey for them is truncated, retarded, finished, in the case of many people who just say, well, this is too much for me. And it is. No one can reconcile fear and trust as emotions at the same time. One or other of them has to go, and unfortunately, it's usually trust. That's an important subject I think that we'll come back to when we describe the developmental model of human life and the damage that can be done by well-intentioned but an ill-conceived religious instruction that terrorizes the infant, child or otherwise, and makes God seem like a policeman, a tyrant, a judge, the boogeyman, or something else. And the child easily projects onto God those emotions, so that when it becomes an adult, even though it may have all kinds of theological training, which is abstract, the emotions faithfully record how they were programmed. And so that emotional overtones of our early religious education substantially conditions our capacity to hear the instruction and of genuine theology and the Scripture. Hence, we need a process that is going to organically heal those wounds and open us to trust, and that's it. One way of doing it, to listen to the Word of God in trust, and to allow that Word to become more and more assimilated and interiorized, and to be transformed into love. Love is what rests in God. And this is only a beginning. Once one is established on that level, which is the normal Christian life, the experience of the risen life of Christ arising in us as a capacity to relate to others as Christ would love them and as He has loved us. And this is the whole movement of contemplative prayer, to heal the wounds, to infuse into us the divine life, which is beamed all the time. God never rests day or night. Like the sun, the energy is always coming out. If you turn your back on it, like the world does every 24 hours, then you don't get the sun. But the sun is always there. All the energy is there. And if we could just open. St. John of the Cross uses that example in his mystical treatises, and says the sun, God like the sun, is always shining. If you just pull the curtains, that's all you have to do. But sometimes those curtains are made out of lead or concrete. And that's the difficulty. It's not something God invented. We have invented the static, the blindness. Notice how in the gospel, hearing and seeing are constantly infirmities, dumbness that that Jesus is healing. And the physical healing is the symbol of the interior spiritual releasing that is going on invisibly in those miracles. Let us then take a quick look at contemplative prayer in general. Most methods of meditation that are non-conceptual are designed in shaking us out of our ordinary psychic thinking. If you reflect on your conscious life, there is always some particularities going by on the inner screen of consciousness, either a perception, an impression, a memory, an image, sense, impression, abstract thinking, reason, any one of the senses. And we're always thinking of something and reflecting on something and then emotionally reacting to what we're thinking about or the experience that's happening to us. And this might be called the false self, our experience, our conscious experience of the false self system. And our normal thinking kind of takes it for granted and reinforces it by thinking about it again and again and reacting according to habitual patterns formed in early childhood. And so this might be perhaps visualized somewhat like this. Let us pretend that this circle is the core of our being, or the true self. This is that our participation in that boundless field of energy, which is light, life, and love, that the ultimate mystery, whom we call God, has concretized in our particular creation or human nature. That is the place where we can hear the ultimate message of the universe and be transformed into it so that we become, in a sense, that message as well as hearing it. It's like breathing. The air gets into you. But even more, in this case, the message begins to transform us on every level of our being. Now, suppose around that, from childhood on, you build a shell consisting of your idea of yourself and the world drawn from your personal experience, which of the physical world, and of how people have treated you, and so on, and how you cope with the way they treated you at an age when we had no reason to balance things out or to evaluate what was happening to us. Nothing is more vulnerable than the human being in its first year of life. It's totally dependent on the parents, especially the mother. So that if the mother or father are inadequate for this task, the child is almost certainly programmed for distress, human misery, some of which it may never recover from. As you know, the worst, the most tragic form of human denial of the basic needs of life is a withdrawal of affection or a rejection of the child during the first 2 years of life, which in some cases results in permanent damage. And this is the case of a sociopath, of whom 1 maybe in 500 in the population, it's said, suffers from this disease. It's a moral disease. It's an emotional inability to relate to the moral judgment. And these are the souls that perform these terrible crimes for no purpose, because to them, to step on a fly or to wipe out a human being is the same emotional response. But all of us suffer because of the human condition, which is not perfect, which is limited, because few people, including our parents, have penetrated to the ultimate message of the universe. And even if they had, we probably would suffer from our peer group or television or the culture or something. So there's just no guarantee of a perfect first year or two. during which a great many of the basic emotional attitudes are fixed with the way the child copes with situations that are traumatic, it can't handle, doesn't want to handle, hence defense mechanisms, repressive apparatus, and all the things that the developmental psychologists can have marvelously unearthed for us. The unconscious, remember, is only 100 years old as a science, and it's still got a long way to go. But it reinforces the great wisdom of the spiritual masters, who had an insight into this without being able to express it scientifically as we can today. So now this insight is available to anybody who can read or who has intelligence, and hence it's an important aspect of spiritual direction. You cannot possibly be a spiritual director today without a sound basis in developmental psychology insofar as it relates to the spiritual journey, and some other things would be helpful too, like some knowledge of anthropology, etc. Well, anyway, this, what Jung is pleased to call the persona, as it develops, becomes our mask with which we present ourselves to the world so that everybody isn't going to penetrate into our interior. Now in here is all the emotional junk of a lifetime that has accumulated as a result of stress and tension at a time when we couldn't cope with it. So hence we don't perceive, we have no psychological experience of the true self unless, as I say, God manifests it to us to our great surprise without our sometimes knowing what's happening. So this is like a hard shell or crust that is more or less fossilized by habits, fixations, emotional ways of functioning. And it prevents us from looking inward at the true self or at our spiritual nature. And so whenever we start to look in, there's a tendency to back out because this is unknown territory and some of it is very painful. At this point, therapy is a great help to help us to adjust to this material and realize why it's there and not to be too upset by it and so on, and to adjust to life. But the spiritual journey takes it even more seriously. The purpose of the spiritual journey is union, not just to produce a fairly respectable human animal or a domesticated rationality, something that can survive in society without being in jail too often. This spiritual journey is something else. If enough psychiatrists who are on the spiritual journey could integrate this stuff, this would be an immense service to the next generation, and there are quite a few, and I'm sure the transpersonal psychologists are at least open to some degree of this evolution. But there are some outstanding ones who've already made that leap. In any case, suppose then we find ourselves in a situation where there are so many things going on the superficial level of our psychological consciousness, which might be called in this context the psychic self, that we never experience our interior except maybe once in a great while. The purpose of the spiritual journey is to soften up this crust and to penetrate it by various means. Now, one way to penetrate is to slow down the programs that are constantly going on, or to thin out the particular thoughts, concepts, impressions that are going by all the time by a moment of interior silence or by some method of quieting the mind. This is an essential preliminary to being able to do contemplative prayer. Now, one way of doing that is perhaps to conceive of our psychic life as a kind of river that is flowing by within us, of which we participate. The true self is the river itself, and the persona, or the psychic self, the surface level of thoughts, is the surface of the stream down which various boats, sailboats, motorboats, water skiers, garbage, various things are sailing. So there's always something going by, and they're so closely packed together that you never perceive the river on which they're resting. It never occurs to us, well, what are these thoughts sitting on? They're not just hanging in midair, are they? But we have no psychological experience of the deep self or this true self. Aha. So this is like that harbor in, I think it's in Hong Kong, called Aberdeen, where you can't tell where the shore ends and the boats begin, because in these Chinese junks, people are living. That's their homes, and they're so closely put together that you can't see the river. No way of knowing whether you're on land or sea. Suppose you separated the boats a bit. What would happen? Without any further effort, up would come the river. Similarly, in meditation of a non-conceptual character, that is contemplation, you deliberately begin to spread the boats out. If you succeed in some degree, up comes the river on which they were resting. In other words, the spiritual nature or level or value of our being begins to insinuate itself into daily life. And so we might... Now this is the river here. And on this river are all kinds of boats going by. Now one way of slowing them down is to choose a sacred symbol of some kind, which is the symbol of letting go of those thoughts or spreading them out, and at the same time a symbol of directing our attention to the river or the depths of the river or the true self. So one way is to introduce on the river another boat, a boat which is the symbol of our intention of letting all the others go, a boat which kind of gobbles up all the other boats and reduces them to one. Then we would have a clear, unobstructed view of the river. In the centering prayer, then, we suggest choosing a sacred word of 1 or 2 syllables, and a small boat, in other words, one that won't grasp your attention, like a flashy boat or an ocean liner. And we choose a word of 1 or 2 syllables for that reason, with which we feel comfortable. But we call it a sacred word, this is an important point, not because of its content, that is what's on board of that concept, but because of its intent. The intent being let go of all other thoughts and open to the presence of God in faith and love in our inmost being. So there are 2 directions it's taking: letting go of everything on the psychic self level, opening to everything on the spiritual level, which is, in faith, God. The sacred word, then, is meant to replace all other impressions, thoughts, noise, etc. So on the basis of that principle, we try to find a place of solitude or silence, if you can find such a place in your house or town, so that we won't be bothered by sudden noises that jam us up. Then we choose a position that is relatively comfortable, so you won't be thinking of the body. A back that is straight, but on a cushion is a great help. The more longer your meditation, the more you may need to sit in a chair or a pillow. A straight back is a help because it allows the free flow of energies. And then finally, we slowly close our eyes as the symbol of letting go of all our preoccupations. And then, like that dear man at Wernersville, we let ourselves go. We don't try to think of any particular thought. On the contrary, every time we're enticed by some flashy boat, we return to the sacred word as the symbol of letting it go, or we simply renew our inner look or our inner attention to the presence of God within us. That, in brief, is the actual method of centering prayer. Its background, its rationale, the reason why we do it, and the kind of ways to handle the different kinds of thoughts or boats, impressions that come down the stream of consciousness, we will look at next time.